that? Tracks. Horses, quite a few of them.
Rockstar Games. You can call them many things, but regular and often is certainly not one of them. They like to take their time, and they've done just that with the sequel to what was a magnificent title in 2010's Red Dead Redemption. Here, this sequel, which is actually a prequel, is something special indeed. Now, for me, Red Dead Redemption was the better game than GTA 5, even if GTA 5 is clearly the better testament for technical delivery of an open world game, and certainly the benchmark that every other title still needs to better in that score. That's all been pushed aside now with Red Dead Redemption 2, which is an absolute magnificent piece of work and possibly, in my opinion, their magnum opus at this point. Even though I haven't finished this game and I've only had like 6 hours on each version so far and many more to come, I wanted to get up the performance and visual comparisons between the base consoles, which is this version here, and shortly tomorrow the Pro and the Xbox One X versions before I dive headlong into a full technical analysis of the title without having to get stuck in all the resolution and performance metrics that people want to see. I've split them out and got them up as quick as possible. So here we're looking at the Xbox One S and the PS4 at standard, and what do we see? Well, a visually beautiful game. Both versions run temporal AA and some form of reconstruction from that temporal AA to improve the image quality. You can certainly see it smoothing out and blending in those frames and edges at certain points in the title, certainly in the lighting areas. The pixel shaders tend to use a dithered pattern occasionally. You can see where it's blending those frames together and merging that information, but if you catch it on a jump or the movement just here, you can see where the edges kind of smooth out and the pixel shaders blend in and smooth out that detail, which looks quite rough and jagged just as soon as you move. But again, this is analysing it at a close detail you wouldn't really notice while playing the game, unless your nose is pressed right up against the screen, and then really you're missing the game itself anyway. So another reason this stands out is the fact that temporal AA seems to be the only AA the game uses. Many areas of the game are left untouched if you catch it at certain points, and when it flicks between one camera shot and the next, it's brand new data, brand new geometry, then there's no previous information to use from. It's clean and raw, and then you can see all the stair steps and all the signs of what the resolution is. But very quickly that temporal AA just smooths out and cleans the image up. It's a standard now. I said it years ago and I covered it recently in Spider-Man. You can also see here that the SSO is actually better on PS4 than on the Xbox One. You can see it here in the cinematics. So the ambient occlusion is stronger and denser. It's got better coverage. And again, some of the pixel shading work seems to be slightly better on the PS4 than it is on the Xbox One S. Far from a huge amount, but enough when you're doing head-to-head comparisons here to see it, but it really isn't going to affect anyone's enjoyment of the title, and you wouldn't notice it unless you're looking at this close detail. Aside this, we also see some differences in texture filtering, and certainly the detail from the distance. Shadow cascades look ever so slightly shorter, and LOD looks around the same, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's certain points where it is cut back ever so slightly. But overall, it looks a very similar title on visual quality between the two versions, with slight tweaks, tucks here and there for the team to just get the most out of the hardware as best as possible. Remember, the PS4 was the lead platform, so I'm sure that has helped the development process also. So in terms of resolution, what are we looking at? Well, the Xbox One S comes in surprisingly under 1080p. It comes in at what appears to be a completely fixed 1536 by 864. I didn't find any points from my counts thus far that shows it's dynamic, but I wouldn't rule that out. It is always an option, but it certainly is a softer and slightly blurrier image overall, but very good still on a 1080p screen. But some of the elements that we've just mentioned obviously highlight even higher when the resolution quality is lower, so of the two, the Xbox One suffers slightly more. The PS4 unsurprisingly pushes a fully native 1920 by 1080, which again doesn't look to be dynamic and holds that at all times. Again, I will say though that I'm not ruling out a dynamic solution here, because looking at that, that's 56% improvement, or at least a decrease on the Xbox One version, so that's slightly more than you would expect. 1536, usually it's around 1600 by 900 versus 1080p, so it is slightly better here, but I'm sure they've really worked hard to optimize the PS4 version, and it looks magnificent for it. Certainly on a 1080p screen it looks great, and even on a 4K one it holds up very well indeed, and certainly wouldn't make your eyes hurt like any version really does. I've seen some of the comments so far of the Xbox One being a horrible blurry mess, and really that isn't the case. Yes, do not play it on a 4K screen obviously, but if you play it on a 1080p screen it still looks marvellous. In terms of visual quality, I'm not seeing a huge difference. Certainly the texture filtering is slightly lower on the Xbox One than it is on the PS4, and shadow filtering, the dithered edges, stands out as well as being slightly lower. But I must say, much of this comes down to the fact that resolution is lower, so everything else, all the buffers, all the image quality, everything on top of that is affected by the fact that it's all rendered at a lower resolution, so that can come into effect on all of these elements that I'm talking about. Visually in the game, they are almost practically identical. Really the biggest differences stand out during the cinematic sequences, which ramp up the GPU usage and therefore are the most obvious ones where you will see the difference. Outside of this, time of day, weather, dynamic weather, all those elements can also change it, but I've captured as accurately the time here as I can on all my tests. So moving away from the visual quality, we've now got that put to bed. What everyone probably came for is the performance difference, and yes, there are some issues in the game, not unsurprising. This is a massive, gigantic, systemic open world title that has so many dynamic elements and so many brilliant coding sections in here. The amount that they're using these poor Jaguar CPUs and GPU here to create an element and a world so organic and realistic as this, all the things that you don't even see in single player titles you see here, which I'll cover more in my full analysis. But going into the performance, we do get some dips during the cutscenes, and of the two, the Xbox One is ever so slightly worse than the PS4, not by a huge margin. They both don't hold a locked 30, which isn't really a surprise, but the Xbox One tends to struggle slightly more than the PS4 does, so just be aware of that when you're playing the title. But both titles can drop down to mid to low 20s at certain points, but the biggest difference here is the fact that they both hold on to that 33 milliseconds quite often, and most of the time, 99% of the time, it's only the next refresh cycle, so it's another 16 milliseconds. You're jumping into 50 millisecond times every now and then. But predominantly through most of the title, and I'm talking, these are obviously elements here, I'm giving an example of the gameplay. You can see how consistent it is even during battles in these beautiful vistas. It can have some issues. Occasionally it can skip into 16 milliseconds, more often on the Xbox One, usually down to the RAM allocation. I would imagine the limited amount of RAM, and therefore it's running out of space. It needs to flip it slightly early. But overall, there's no VSync issues here. It's totally engaged. There's no tearing going on at all, and it's a very smooth and consistent game 99% of the time. But when it does dip in some of the heavier sections like Valentine in the town centre, I've noticed so far, which you'll see a little later in this video, it does dip right down to below 20, but really it's the consistency of around 50 milliseconds that's causing those spikes, and occasionally it can dip into the 66 milliseconds, but it is smooth overall. But those sections can bog the game down when you feel that control element, and there's a combination there of probably CPU elements because there's a lot of AI characters in the title. It certainly isn't a bad performing title, and it's better than what the original Xbox 360 and certainly the PS3 version of Red Dead Redemption was, but don't expect a locked 30. But this is a day release code. It has been patched to the latest version available at the moment, and I'm sure the team will still be beavering away trying to get the most out of both of these machines, and we will see improvements. Remember, we did see a lot of improvements for GTA 5 when that launched on the consoles. There was a lot of improvements that came over that period of life. This game has very, very long legs. It's not going to sit around idle by Rockstar by any stretch of the imagination, so don't expect these performance metrics to last as a static base for very long. I'm sure we'll see huge improvements going forward, but if you are looking for problems, then this section right here is just what I'm talking about. Anyway, that's it for now. It's a quick look at the detailed metrics and the visual quality. You can see all the performance metrics in the description below. Please, if you like what I do, I'm completely self-funded and independent. Subscribe, share where appropriate, and possibly support me over on Patreon to keep my work going and my videos of this quality. Thank you again to Rockstar for allowing me to have a review code and get this on day of release. I really appreciate it. The Xbox One version is my own. I bought that in retail. Anyway, you guys and girls take care. Enjoy the rest of the moments of the video, and I'll see you tomorrow with some more Red Dead Redemption.
Oh well. Hey, get moving. Yeah. Huh? Damn it. Hey, what's your problem?
No business. No business, sir, but please, I beg you,